Name is Rajat Sidana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. Supporting me in this webinar, we have Mansi. Mansi is a GMAT strategy expert. She's going to be your co-host today. The goal of this webinar is to introduce you to the process of pre-thinking. Um, my second goal today is also to introduce you to the concept of visualization, which is reading and kind of imagining what you've just read and using these two concepts, the concept of pre-thinking and the concept of visualization, we will solve some of the most challenging questions, and we'll see how once you visualize information, once you follow the pre-thinking framework, questions that seem difficult, questions that are actually 700 level, they become really easy to solve. Now, I have about 50 students here in this webinar, and to make sure that we do justice to you guys, I want to kind of understand you guys a bit better. I want to know a bit more about you. Um, First things first, how many of you are current e-GMAT students? Let me put in a yes no poll. So if you're a paid student, select yes, or otherwise select no. All right, let's get a few more responses. I have 54 students here right now. If you're a paid student, select yes. If you're not a paid student, uh, select no. 3, 2, and 1. And I think it just tells us just the makeup of this group. I have about 55 folks here right now. The poll here is, if you're a paid student, you select yes. If you're someone who's just experiencing the free trial, you should select no. And that way I kind of understand the makeup of this group. So it's about 50-50 based on what I can see over here, based on the about 40 responses out of 60 folks who are in the session right now. Okay. All right. So, for those of you who are not paid students, we conduct 2 free webinars every week. We have an RC webinar next week, which is exactly a week from now. For those of you who struggle with GMAT RC, for those of you who are not voracious readers, for those of you who struggle with comprehension, this is the webinar for you. That's exactly a week from now. I'd be co-hosting this webinar with another e-GMAT expert, Harsha. Then we also have another webinar tomorrow. We have a quant webinar on inequalities and absolute value. That's tomorrow, 2nd of April, exactly the same time, 24 hours from now. In that, we focus on inequalities and absolute value. We focus on both PS as well as DS questions here. We start from the very basics and then move on to solving the most challenging questions. And we demonstrate that the fundamentals that you apply to solve the easy questions remain the same as you go towards the most challenging questions, and but the application is what varies. And again, we look at that unified approach. So if either of these topics are of interest, if you need help excelling, do click on either one of these, and I'll share these again towards the end as well. Okay. For those of you who are experiencing a free trial, we have a very comprehensive free trial. Make sure you experience the nuts and bolts of it. And if you have questions, you can always write to us at rajat@e-gmat.com. With that, let's kind of understand a bit more. One of my questions that I asked was, when do you plan to take the GMAT? Um, the second question that I have is, what is your target GMAT score? That's over here. You can put that question, respond over here as well. And these questions are interesting because they help me understand the makeup of this group. They help you understand, what folks who are in the session with you, what kind of scores are they aiming for. There's no right or wrong answer here. Essentially, it's just what you're aiming for is what you're aiming for. It just is, it's data for us, overall. So with regards to when do people plan to take the test, we have about 15%. That's quite a few in the next 15 days. Thank you for spending your time with us. Um, the biggest group, about 40% of you, are those who haven't taken our data as of yet. We also have then we have like 4 similarly sized groups beyond that, so that's good. Um, and then with regards to target GMAT scores, 730 to 750 is the biggest segment over here. That's about 44%. We also have a significant number of folks who are aiming for scores of 760 or higher, and then a fairly good number of people in that 710 to 720 group. Now, a couple of you have raised hands. You want microphone rights. Unfortunately, in this webinar, I won't be able to grant microphone rights to you guys. Probably towards the end, but not in the beginning. just given the number of people in the room right now. Now, I want to ask a couple of other interesting questions here. One is what kind of uh, edition do you prefer, either GMAT Focus or actually, the first question I should have asked is, have you heard of the GMAT Focus Edition? This is a yes/no question. If you have heard of it, select yes. If you've not heard of it, select no. And for those of you who have not heard of it, I'm going to share a link. Which GMAT Focus is essentially a new version of GMAT, which you can take starting Q4 of this year, so 1st of October. That's what we know. And then, if you've heard of it, then my question is, which edition do you prefer? Um, and for those of you who don't know what GMAT Focus is, what changes are there, I have this link, link number 2, which says GMAT Focus Edition. If you click on it, you can get to it as well. Let me broadcast results with regards to people's preference. The current GMAT versus GMAT Focus, and then those of you who, there are a bunch of you who are not sure. I want to ask this question. Those of you who know, and but 75% of you are aware of the changes. Um, Tell me your preference one way or the other. If you prefer the current GMAT, you can say CG, and then you can say, here is why I prefer the current GMAT. If you prefer GMAT Focus, you can say GF, and then you can say, here's why I prefer. And then if you're not sure, you can say NS, not sure. And then you can say, here is why I prefer, why I'm not sure. No, why current GMAT? So I want the reason. I can see what you prefer, so because their preference is in the poll, but why CG or why GF? Okay, it depends on when you plan to apply. CG is because what you know. So R1 versus why GF? For those of you who prefer the GMAT Focus, why GF? Okay, CG is also because you got a sentence correction. GF is shorter syllabus, shorter test duration. Okay, I've already prepared. Perfect. That's good. All right. So the primary reason why people prefer the current GMAT, or reasons I would say it's not just one, is because a, they're aware of it. B, the timing wise are one, and the primary reason why people prefer GMAT Focus is because of the shorter format, as well as you know lack of or reduction in syllabus or so. Um, Interesting. Okay, I've heard this more comprehensive evaluation earlier as well. Perfect. Thank you very much for that feedback. Your inputs, your feedback, that's what makes this session fun. Okay. And some people like data insights. That's good because good in data insights. I absolutely love the data insights section. I think in terms of the kind of skills that it tests, it's phenomenal. It's very, very relevant for MBAs. I mean, as I'm reasonably aware of the MBA curriculum, having gone through the entire process about 15 years back. Um, so that's something that's there. All right, thank you. That's good. And again, as I said, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just about what you prefer and why you prefer. You should just know that. So with that, let's move forward. And we are now in the presentation pane. You should see a presentation that says CR1, Pre-thinking for Assumptions. Now, right below the presentation, you will see a Q&A or a question and answer pod appear. This is a place for your questions and my answers. Okay, so if you have a doubt, place the question in the Q&A pod. Either I or Mansi will respond to it. And then on the right-hand side, is where I ask my questions and you put in your answers. For example, you'll see a poll, which format, which GMAT do you prefer, online versus in center? And you can answer this poll question. This is an old poll question. If you choose to, which one do you prefer? Do you want to plan to take the test at home, or do you want to go to the center overall if you don't have a preference? So this is a place where I'm going to ask questions and you're going to put in your answers, essentially. Okay. So this was just a test, so that's good. But again, data is interesting. You see 75% of people prefer to go to the center, whereas 22% prefer to take the test online. Okay, all right. All right. So, does e-GMAT offer tutoring sessions? We don't offer a tutoring session um, as such as a practice, but we do go on a case by case basis. I think one of the problems that we face is we always have to manage our subject matter bandwidth given the number of students and given the kind of support that we provide. But yes, if you have a very specific case, we evaluate you, and then we do offer that. Again, Mansi, if you can share my email address to this with the student, I'd be happy to really look at this and look at that. So Jacqueline, there again, yeah, not a generic offering, but on a case by case basis, we might just do. Is there a change in score versus in center versus at home? No, the scoring remains the same. Yeah, with at home, you don't get your enhanced score report. You can't buy it within center. You can buy your enhanced score report. Um, so that's the only difference. Okay. So essentially, there are three parts of this one. And the first part, I'm going to briefly talk about your study plan. For many of you, this is your first interaction with e-GMAT, and so this will tell you a bit about what we do. That's going to be about 6 minutes. That's over here. And then we're going to go into the core of the webinar. It's going to be about 120 minutes, and then towards the end, if you have questions about your GMAT preparation, if you have doubts, if you're an e-GMAT student and you want to really just say, hey, what should I do next? If I have enough information, I'd answer that. If not, I'm going to ask you to write to me. Um, or if you have questions about your MBA, if you have questions about, in general, anything about the economy, whether you should go for your MBA or not, what considerations you should have while choosing between US, Europe, Canada, and those things. That's something that I usually reserve my about 20 minutes towards the end to answer those questions. Okay. The session is being recorded. You will get the recording on email as well as it will be on our YouTube channel, which if you haven't subscribed to, definitely do that. Okay, so thank you for asking those questions. All right, so essentially, when we started e-GMAT about a decade back, where Pyle and I wanted to make a difference in how people learn, and and essentially at that point we kind of saw two prevalent architectures that existed when it comes to learning. One is what we call as the book-based architecture, where everyone goes through the same learning journey. During the learning phase, there's very little feedback that's provided, and then people learn. They spend about 20-25% of their time learning, and then 70-75% of their time practicing questions. And the notion that's there is, hey, if you've learned well enough, you practice enough questions, you kind of excel. And what we found as a problem with this architecture was that essentially there's really no feedback while learning. The second thing which was there was that, yes, while this architecture works if you want to get good at anything, but in the test prep world, it's like winning a race. It's very difficult to get excellent at anything using this architecture unless and until you already have a very good foundation to begin with. Or so we kind of went about creating a learning architecture which we call as akin to a private tutoring based learning architecture, where essentially you spend about 60 to 65% of your time learning and excelling on information, and you get so much feedback in the learning phase that that essentially you need much less time during the practice phase, and then even there you get feedback that's a lot more personalized. So we kind of call this a private tutoring based architecture, because essentially this is how a private tutor works with you. So a decade ago, we started this company trying to build a learning architecture along with the corresponding technology, and we're still working on building this architecture, enhancing this, and we're kind of what it said, but 80% of where a private tutor would be with regards to this learning architecture or so. And I'm going to give you a glimpse of how personalization happens in this learning architecture through just one aspect of it, which is building your own personalized study plan. And essentially, if you want to build a study plan where you want to go from a 600 to a 720, we're going to really talk about how do you go about doing that. So in the e-GMAT world, if you want to build that study plan, one of the first things which you want to know is what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, which is what we call as quantifying your starting abilities. So you take an assessment quiz and you get very definitive ability markers for all your ability pieces. Then we built an AI-driven tool where you put in those ability scores. It analyzes that. It compares that against the data from a bunch of students. So it has a huge database of students. It also has a neural engine that sits in there, and based on your starting abilities, based on your commitment, time commitments, it creates an optimized set of milestones that you should hit to get to your target GMAT score. And once you do that, it then personalizes which aspects of the course should you focus on. For example, if you're really good in quant, maybe you don't need to go through the learning phase. Maybe you can directly go to the practice phase, and it'll tell you what you need to focus on in doing that. So let's just show how this looks. So how do you get your starting abilities? This is quantifying starting abilities. You take a sigma x mock, and when you do that, you get your starting abilities. And now, how do you set your milestones? You put that in what we call as a PSP, or a personalized study planner, which is an AI-driven utility that allows you that understands the GMAT and allows you to build your study plan. So let's see how we do this. So let's say you take the diagnostic, the sigma x mock, and you get a 600 with a Q44 and a V28. You put this data into the PSP. The PSP then really gives you an approximation of what you should aim for quant and verbal. Again, this is something that it tells you this is what it gives. If you don't like this, if your preference is different, um, uh, uh, you can manually change this. And again, it ensures that the combination always leads to a 720. Then it gives you a starting or your target abilities for that 720. So these are abilities for Q50 and V38. And again, it takes into account your starting scores over here, which is why it takes into account your SC ability, your CR ability, and your RC ability here. And it builds that study plan. On the left hand side, these are inputs that we got from the Sigma X mock. The Sigma X mock computes your arithmetic, algebra abilities, and SCCR and RC. On the right hand side is the output from PSP, and in the middle, what you really see is the time per subsection, and this is dedicated time per subsection that is needed over here. So essentially, this is you have right on day one, you have that time where you know how much time am I going to spend in SC or arithmetic or algebra and so on and so forth. Okay, Sorojit says I have newly enrolled post completing the getting started and taking the Sigma X mock. Is there, do you work with a mentor to do this? No, you don't need to work with a mentor to do this. You should do this right away, because that way you don't wait for a mentor. We don't want you to do that. A lot of people buy our courses on the weekend, that and you really don't have 50 mentors available on the weekend to cater to 50 students. But then again, and that's where the onboarding works really well. When you buy the course, you've taken the Sigma X mock, you have a checklist that you need to go through, and that checklist is always available in your dashboard. So you start learning, and then if you have any doubts about this, absolutely right, we do provide support on the weekend. And then we have onboarding sessions on Wednesdays and Thursdays, which we recommend that you do that. But before that, if you have a doubt, write toward our mentors, record video responses to your doubts, and they make sure that every response, every question is answered right then and there. So once you have this study plan, we then create a day by day plan for you. This is something where you put in how many hours you're going to spend on weekdays and weekends, and this will tell you when you need to study SC, CR, or RC. So essentially, this is just a glimpse of how the study planning piece works at e-GMAT. Again, if you need help with your study plan, we do offer a limited number of slots for folks who are not our students here. So you can click on this and get your personalized study plan overall. Okay, and because of this personalization, it allows you to channelize your energy. And then because of the focus on stage one of learning, and then the personalized feedback, we've been able to deliver more 700 scores or higher than other folks have. So this was just based on stats on GMAT Club. Since 2021, e-GMAT has accounted for 60% of all 700 plus scores. Everyone else combined has accounted for about 40%. And this is something you can really go back. GMATLab does a really good job of organizing these scores in a chronological order, so you can go verify that as well. Also, with regards to quant, a lot of people know us for verbal. We've accounted for a major chunk of Q49 or higher scores, as well as when it comes to 5-star reviews, we have more 5-star reviews than anyone else does. Okay. All right. With that, if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, I'd love to stay connected with you. You can click on click to connect, or you can just look me up on LinkedIn. This will also be a way for you to connect with students at any business school, whether you're talking about Harvard or whether you're talking about one of the IIMs in India. Okay. So with that, let's get to the second part of this webinar, which is, how do you pre-think assumptions? So for the second part, let me hide this. We're going to have a fairly simple approach. We're going to really understand how you approach pre-thinking today, then or assumption questions today. Then we're going to do a pre-thinking exercise. This is the goal over here, is to build a foundation in assumptions, to build a foundation in pre-thinking, to fix the process as to how do you go about pre-thinking in any question. Once we have this foundation in these three arguments, then we'll solve two really challenging questions, where we'll apply pre-thinking, where we'll apply visualization, and we'll make sure that you can really see how all of this works. Now, pre-thinking requires what I call as conscious effort, or deliberate effort. A lot of people come in and think and say once they know pre-thinking, they can just go and it'll magically improve their ability. That's not going to happen in this webinar, because frankly, anything that's worth achieving requires a lot of focused effort. But what this webinar aims to do is to give you a framework and to give you a criteria, so that you can, as you solve assumption questions, you can ask yourself, am I going in the right direction? Is my ability to visualize information increasing with every question that I'm solving? Am I more confident with every question that I'm solving? So that's what this webinar will do. It'll tell you the level of certainty you should have when you reject answer choices overall. But then, post this webinar, we'll also talk about this. Hey, what should you do next? What should be your next steps, so that you can build on this, and in about 8 to 9 days, or in about 25 hours of focused effort, you can excel in pre-thinking, not just in assumption questions, but also in strengthen, weaken, evaluate, logically complete, and so on and so forth. And once you build this, you can even apply pre-thinking, and it works beautifully for bold-faced questions as well. And once you do this in the context of CR, you're going to really see how beautifully it works in RC as well. And in the next session, we will demonstrate pre-thinking overall. Okay. So with that, again, at a very high level, um, we'll demonstrate what you do today, and then we will move forward. Just give me 2 minutes, guys. Yes, everything okay? Why did you call me in the middle of the session? What are you talking about? Yeah. All right, guys, I'm back. So let's talk about your current approach to CR questions. I'm going to give you a poll question, and I want to figure out which methodology do you follow. So when you think about CR, there are two methodologies, or even before that, I want to talk about what pre-thinking is. So pre-thinking is thinking of one potential assumption in your mind in 15 seconds before you look at answer choices. And I want to clarify this, and we've been clarifying this for the last 8 years, 9 years or so, because a lot of people confuse pre-thinking as paraphrasing, which is a power score term, which is again, or a Kaplan term, which is a replacement for predicting the answer. Pre-thinking is not about predicting what you're going to see in the answer choices. Pre-thinking is a litmus test. It's a process that ensures that when you read the argument, you comprehend how the author arrives at the conclusion. You understand the author's justification to come up at the conclusion, and you're able to visualize the information that the author has provided. That's all pre-thinking is. The reason we make you think of one potential assumption is because we want to make sure that you're able to pre-think. Okay, so with that, I want to just understand over here. Just 1 second. Just give me. So for some reason, my computer went a bit um, haywire. Okay. So with that, I want to figure out which methodology do you follow. I'm going to put in a poll question. This is a generic short answer poll. If you follow methodology 1, write M1. If you follow methodology 2, write M2. All right, let's get a few more responses. You can see lots of people follow M1, lots of people follow M2 as well. And usually, when I'm looking at, and someone says none, I mean, I hopefully follow one methodology to at least a methodology to follow to answer assumption questions or CR questions in general. For those of you who follow methodology one, I hope my goal today would be to give you enough justification to for you to kind of try pre-thinking, give it a chance. For those of you who follow methodology two, I want to give you a framework. I want you to figure out to make sure that you focus on the right area so you get better at it. Because if you're in this session, clearly you're not at 90th percentile, even with following M2. So I want to make sure that I push you towards the 90th percentile. I tell you what are the right things that you should focus on. If you're not succeeding using pre-thinking, what could be the cost so that you can ultimately make the most of this? Okay. Now, when it comes to pre-thinking, pre-thinking is not an end all. Let me just say this: it's a means to an end, but then there are certain prerequisites that need to be in place for you to be able to leverage pre-thinking. Okay, very similar to frameworks and with regards to business. If you want to really look at in my opinion, one of the most useful frameworks is Porter's Five Forces, and it's probably the most underrated framework that exists. But again, for people to appreciate Porter's Five Forces, um, it's really important that they have a foundation in business. They understand how workflows work. They understand how value chains work, and if you don't have a foundation in value chain, you can't understand the Five Forces framework. Um, for those, just a quick thing. How many of you have heard of the Five Forces framework? We just clear all answers. Yes, no. Okay. If you've heard of it, that's wonderful. I mean, you're kind of preparing for business school. If you've not heard of it, this is something that you'll learn in your first year, probably in the first couple of semesters at B school. It's Michael Porter's framework. Michael Porter, in my opinion, is the father of strategy as it relates to unit economies. It's yeah, foremost authority in business education, one of the foremost authorities, along with Clayton Christensen and a couple of other folks overall. Okay, but let's come back from the MBA to the GMAT, because you guys need to clear the GMAT before you go for your MBA. So one of the most important skills that we'll focus on is the ability to visualize information. Now, when it comes to excelling in CR questions and even in RC questions, you've got to be able to really see what you read, or you've got to be able to visualize what you read. And building that visualization muscle is a slow process, which means you've got to slow down your reading speed to do that. Now, what does visualizing mean? So let's say you're given a statement which says, "Hey, there's a seawall and it's built of concrete and it's going to be able to sustain sea waves." That's the claim that the author is making. So in that case, you'll have to imagine a seawall against a coast, and especially if you live in the Netherlands, and you've got to really just think of high waves, and you say the wall is so tall and so sturdy that even the strongest waves caused by one of the strongest tornadoes or tsunamis would not be strong enough to cross over or break that wall. And that visualization of that information is something which is really important. The next piece, which is really critical, is to understand when the author makes that claim, what's the basis of it? What justification does the author give to make that claim? And CR arguments are really well formed. So they're not arguments that where the author doesn't or gives a very loose justification. They're really well reasoned arguments, and an understanding of that reasoning, not just the facts on which the reasoning is based, but just that reasoning as well is what we call as the logical structure, and having an understanding of that is really critical. Once you have one and two, then formulating this falsification question is all that pre-thinking is about, and pre-thinking actually becomes really, really simple. So when people falter with regards to pre-thinking, there are a few reasons why people falter. One is essentially they don't focus on visualizing information. They don't visualize the critical pieces of information while reading a question because they read really quickly, or they don't bother to build a logical structure. In their mind, all they're really thinking about is, hey, what's the assumption? What's my pre-thinking? Or what is the answer? I want to just ask this, and at the risk of not finding anyone, but how many of you, at least a few of you, I think, probably do this, where you're not slow over here, or you're not very deliberate, or you don't build that logical structure in a very deliberate fashion uh, before you start to ask that pre-thinking question. How many of you do that? And one of the things that's really important is that you spend time doing one and two. If you don't spend, at least initially, spend enough time doing one and two before you ask three. This is three, by the way. If you don't do that, you're going to find that you hit a wall with pre thinking. Okay. And we're going to demonstrate that. Okay. With that, let's kind of build a foundation. One of the other reasons why you may falter is because you don't know what an assumption is. So it's really important to have a solid foundation of what an assumption is. So you tell me what an assumption is, and actually, even before that, I'm going to give you a very simple argument. And the reason I'm going to give you this very simple argument is to prove to you that if you comprehend the argument, if you visualize, and if you build the logical structure, finding out assumptions is something that we as humans naturally do. So if you do one and two, three is a very simple thing. So to do that, I'm going to give you this very simple argument. Tell me, what does the author assume in this argument? Write down your answer over here. I'm going to remove broadcast results, so you won't see when you press enter, but I am getting your answers. So type in your answers and just press enter, and the system will store those answers. And once I have about 20 answers, I will share the results. I'll broadcast the results. So here's the assumption. Here's the argument here. It says Joe scored 500 on the GMAT, therefore he'll not get admission in an Ivy League college. So tell me, what does the author assume here? Okay, about 14 answers, I think. Good, 15 answers. Let me broadcast results. You need more than 500 to get into Ivy League. The low score doesn't let him get admission. Ivy League require more than 500. Joe cannot score more than 500 in his next attempt. Okay, 500 is not enough for admission. None of the Ivy Leagues take in students with a 500 score. Okay, so that's good. Good answers. And essentially, you can really see many of your answers are correct. They focus on the logic that the author plays on. So the author gives you a fact. It says, hey, Joe scored 500. This is something, that an event that has already happened. And based on this event, the author says, hey, Joe will not get admission. He makes a prediction, a forward-looking prediction saying that Joe won't get admission in an Ivy League college. And while doing that, the author really just assumes. Why? Because he's linking that fact to that claim and says a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe, okay, and then that piece is really important, is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. Again, very much in line with what you guys have said, except that this focus on Joe is important. Why? Because in his conclusion, the author is focusing on Joe, and in many ways, the assumption is tied to the conclusion overall. Or another way to really look at this is that the author is not saying that the Prince of Saudi Arabia will not get admission um, with a score of 500. Okay. But again, good job. You guys understand what an assumption is. And once you comprehend the argument, you're able to get to the answer. So, with that, tell me, what's the formal definition of an assumption? What is an assumption? Type your answers out again the same way. Once I get about 12 to 14 answers, I'm going to broadcast results. That way, you get into the habit of writing. Your responses are not biased by what other people have written. Okay, I have about 10 answers. Okay. All right. Excuse me. Okay, I have quite a few answers. Let me broadcast results over here. Uh, an unstated premise, a thought that is true in the author's head, fill in the gap between premise and conclusion. It brings a new piece of information that supports the conclusion it must be true. That's a great answer. Assumption is the bridge between conclusion and premise. Yes, every assumption is, but an assumption satisfies a few more constraints as well. guessing the relation between cause and effect. A reasonable definition, not the most precise definition, but a couple of definitions are really good. A lot of other definitions kind of beat around the bush. Okay. In very simple terms, an assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Um, Again, very similar to it's a more succinct way of saying new piece of information supports the conclusion and must be true. Um, Overall. So essentially, it's an unstated idea, which means you cannot infer this from the argument. An assumption is actually a mutually exclusive term, mutually exclusive from an inference. So assumption and inference, though they may sound very similar, are just in some ways they are non-overlapping sets or they're mutually exclusive sets. Um, Now, it's an unstated idea that satisfies this one condition, which is the must be true condition for that conclusion to be valid. Now, in this session, I'm gonna share this PDF with you, but I want you to write down two pieces of information, and this is one of those pieces of information, the definition of assumption. Why? Because as you go through those incorrect answer choices, as you solve questions, and you have those close answer choices that seem correct but are actually incorrect. I'm going to bring back this definition of an assumption. I'm going to bring back this must be true aspect. I'm going to ask you to recite this definition again. So write it down. This is one of those things where if you truly know this definition and if you truly internalize this definition just by using this definition, you can answer every question on GMAT CR. This is very much like, in fact, most of critical reasoning is like physics, where if you understand the fundamental laws, you can make a lot of predictions. You can actually do a lot of engineering problems as well. Um, okay, okay, that's something that's there. All right. So fundamentally, an assumption has two attributes or two characteristics. One is it provides new information. The second is it satisfies this one condition called the must be true condition. And every correct answer choice will satisfy both these attributes. Now, 90% of your question, in fact 95% of your questions play on the must be true aspect, but 5% of those questions play on the new information aspect, which means that you'll have an answer choice that satisfies the must be true condition, an incorrect answer choice that satisfies the must be true condition but does not provide new information. But again, majority of what the test tests is this. We're going to see one question that plays on this part, or where we have one answer choice that plays on this part. Satvak has a really good question. He says, "I'm currently doing hard cementing." That's good, Satvak. And his question is, "Will this webinar provide new information that will help him do this?" So if you're doing hard cementing, you're towards the fag end of the CR course, and which means that pretty much whatever we're going to talk about in this is something that you already know, Satvak. But the only thing that this webinar will do to you is it will help you build your visualization ability, which means if you need that, definitely do that. But if you think that you're doing reasonably well in hard cementing, your accuracy is around that 60% or higher, you probably don't need it then. Okay. So hopefully that answers your question. Great question. Okay. Now, how do you visualize the must be true piece? So at e-GMAT, we try and draw parallels and with regards to everything. So think of your entire argument as this house, and where the roof is the conclusion, and you have three supporting pillars or supporting statements overall. And let's call them 1, 2, and 3. And let's figure out what does this must be true actually mean. So let's assume we remove pillar number 1, the roof still stays upright, it doesn't fall down, which means pillar number 1, while it made the roof stronger, while it was a strengthener, it's not an assumption. Let's take pillar number 3 out as well. The roof still stays upright. So pillar number 3 was a strengthener, still not an assumption. Let's bring everyone back. Let's remove pillar number 2. If that happens, despite pillars number 1 and 3 being there, the roof caves in. And this is what must be true means, which means that, hey, you needed that pillar number 3 over here for the roof to stay upright, or you needed that assumption for the conclusion to not break down. That in many ways is essentially your central idea of what a must be true statement is. It's an essential pillar that keeps your conclusion, or that ensures that your conclusion does not break down. Okay. So what does must be true mean? It means that if the information provided by assumption is not true, then there's a way to invalidate the conclusion, which kind of goes back to what the definition of assumption is. Okay, let's kind of apply this. So whatever you learn, we're going to apply this briefly on some examples so that we cement that information. So same argument over here, and so when you think about this, in this particular argument, what does falsifying the conclusion mean? It means that Joe gets admission despite scoring just 500. Okay, so how do we figure out whether an answer choice is correct? Okay, this is what we said is the correct answer. And let's kind of figure out, is it must be true? Does it satisfy our must be true condition? Which means the question that we are asking is, will Joe get admission if this answer choice is no longer true? It no longer holds true. Now, this is something that I want you to learn from this. Whenever you say that a statement is not must be true, or even not true, because that's essentially what you're really saying. When you say a statement is not true, you're essentially saying the statement is not must be true. What you're automatically saying is that its negated instance becomes true, which means that if you say this is not MBT or not true, what you're automatically saying is that, that this statement becomes true, that a score of 500 for someone like Joe becomes acceptable to Ivy League colleges. Now, if this statement becomes true, then what happens to my conclusion? Does my conclusion break down? Absolutely. When this becomes true, when this becomes true, then my conclusion absolutely breaks down. Why? Because if score of 500 becomes acceptable, then I as an author cannot say with 100% certainty that Joe will not get admission in an Ivy League college. So this kind of satisfies the must be true condition. Now, many of you would really say, hey, Rajat, how can you say that if a statement is not true, then its negated instance automatically becomes true? Let's take a couple of examples. When you say Harvard has the best MBA program, and if you say that's not true, then automatically what you're saying is that Harvard does not have an MBA program, or an MBA program that's just as good, or in fact even better than Harvard exists. Is that not true? If you're saying this statement is not true, aren't you automatically saying this piece over here? Right? Yes, no? Okay. Let's take another example. John runs faster than David, and you say, hey, this is not true. By definition, what you're really saying is that, hey, John does not run faster than David, or David is probably just as fast, or in fact even faster than John. So anytime when you say a statement is not must be true, or anytime when you reject an answer choice saying this is not the correct answer choice, what you're really saying is its negated version is possible. That's all that you're saying. And if the possibility of that negated version kills my conclusion, then you've rejected an answer choice which was the correct assumption. Okay. Okay, so this is the must be true aspect, which means that if you're looking at the correct assumption, then in the presence of its negated version, the conclusion will break down. Why? It's because it's very similar to that essential pillar. If you remove that essential pillar, the roof will cave in. That's kind of the definition of that essential pillar to begin with. Okay. What about not must be true? So we are looking at the incorrect answer choice. Okay, if an answer choice is not must be true, then the conclusion will not break down in the presence of its negated instance. Okay, we're going to take two examples here. We're going to take a simple example, an easy to reject answer choice. A score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score, and we have to really say, hey, is this a must be true answer choice? Is this something that is required? So let's look at this and ask ourselves, is this must be true? Okay, will the conclusion break down if this statement over here is no longer true? So what do we say? If this statement is no longer true, then its negated version becomes true. So a score of 500 on the GMAT becomes a good score now. So if that happens, does it mean that Joe would get admission? The answer is no. Why? Because if you look at the argument is not predicated on the fact whether whether you call a score of 500 a good score or a bad score. In other words, you could replace 500 by 700. The logic of the argument still remains the same. Let's look at another answer choice and say, hey, is that must be true? The answer choice that we are evaluating is the quality of an applicant's essays does not play a significant role in deciding whether he gets into Ivy League. Okay, again, let's first look at this answer choice. It says the quality is not important, or it does not play a significant role. Is that must be true in this context here? Okay, so we go through the same process, asking ourselves, is that must be true. So if the answer is no, then we say, hey, the quality of an applicant's essay does play a significant role. So if essays start to become important, does Joe get admission in an Ivy League college? Absolutely not. Why? Because if Joe doesn't meet the minimum threshold for the GMAT, even though essays may be important, they don't start to play a role till he doesn't meet the bare minimum threshold that the GMAT, that the school, that Ivy Leagues require for the GMAT. So is that must be true? Absolutely not. Okay. So essentially, this was just a fundamental understanding of what an assumption is and what must be true aspect of an assumption is. It's if a statement is must be true, then your conclusion will break down in the presence of its negated instance. That's all that must be true actually means. Okay. Now, throughout this session, we're going to focus on these skills. We're going to visualize everything that we read. We're going to focus on building the logic that the author uses to arrive at the conclusion, and then we're going to formulate the falsification question. Okay. For the correct answer choice, what you're going to really see is the conclusion will break down the presence of negated version. This is essentially applying the negation test. And for the incorrect answer choice is, um, the conclusion will still hold true. Okay. Harold says, sometimes I have trouble trying to negate answer choices or the conclusion when there are many verbs. Can you help me on how to address this? Um, that's a great question. I'll give you a tip on how to go about doing this, and I'm going to share an article with regards to the negation test. It's probably the most comprehensive work on negation. Let me see, web links, negation. A lot of people ask this, so here's the article. But fundamentally, when you start to think about negation, rather than mechanically trying to negate something, first visualize the statement that you want to negate. Ask yourself, what does the statement represent? And if you understand what does the statement represent, your negation represents all the space outside of that statement. Okay. Okay. Ravi says it takes time to absorb all the options and then get stuck into answer choices. I want to ask this group, and great question, Ravi, first of all, what did I talk about timing? What did I talk about timing with regards to pre-thinking and in general with regards to solving questions as a group? What did we talk about timing? Not just comes with practice; it comes with skill building. So when it comes to timing, you will take longer. Frankly, how many of you have focused on building? How many of you have learned anything, or rather, if you go in the last 6 months, can you tell me one thing that you guys have learned and you guys have really gotten better at in the last 6 months? One thing that you've learned and you've really gone, uh, not in CR, anything in life. Probably not in acads, but it could be something when it comes to work or a skill building. SQL, okay, data analysis, SEO, good. Storyboarding, the storyboarding is really, all of these are really great skills, by the way. Programming. Now go back and ask yourself, if you've gotten really good, go back 6 months and really say, to achieve a reasonably complex task in that particular area, how long did it take 6 months back versus how long does it take now? And ask yourself, why does it take a lot less time now? Why are you more efficient? Why can you run for longer now? What are the subsystems that you built to be able to get to this stage? If you're talking about running, the reason why you've gotten better is probably because you've conditioned your heart better, probably because your legs are stronger, probably because your back can take more shocks overall, probably because you've gotten leaner, so your legs are not carrying as much weight. So lots of subsystems need to come in place when it comes to improving on any case. You've gotten better at data analysis. You in your mind, you probably know when you see a trend plot with regards to along with a bar chart in there, how do you draw inferences? You already have those scenarios memorized. If you're looking at three or four different plots, you can probably correlate information from one to the other. And in fact, probably now, even before you look at the plots, you already have those scenarios defined, which is where you're saying if something is trending down, and the other place I see inventory building up, which means the bar chart's going up. And if a box plot over here is working this way, and this is the conclusion that I'm going to draw. Those subroutines are already in your brain, but building those subroutines takes time. Okay, all of those things require skill. Similarly, when it comes to critical reasoning, when you see a statement with a couple of verbs in there, when you see uh, some negations, building those visualizations, that requires really conscious effort. And to be able to build that visualization, you need to put in that conscious effort. You need to spend that minute and a half to 2 minutes analyzing just one single statement. If you don't do that, you don't build it. In fact, many people, when they're studying critical reasoning, what they do, or in fact even reading comprehension, is they try and answer questions in 2.5 minutes, even in the first go. How many of you have tried to do this? Try to answer questions in the first go in 2.5 minutes or so. Yeah. When you do that, you don't have that visualization ability, right? So you read statements, you read statements, you read statements, you use the wrong methods to reject answer choices, and then those wrong methods start to cement in. And what happens is, while you may really see some initial improvement, that improvement stalls. On the other hand, if you take a longer early on, if you focus on building an understanding of 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 of, of statements, you actually build your mental ability. You're making sure that neurons in your brain, when they see a certain combination of words, automatically have a visualization stored in. How many of you have worked with other GMAT experts or GMAT tutors, or have attended sessions where they've really just said, "Hey, uh, on the GMAT, I'm going to teach you stuff that will help you. I'll teach you tricks that will help you save time. You'll be able to answer questions in 2 minutes or less." How many of you have heard GMAT? Just I'm going to clear the previous answers. Okay. If you've if anyone tells you I'm going to tell you tricks to do this, most likely they will not be able to help you succeed. Let me just say this. At e-GMAT, we point blank tell you, initially you might even take up to 5 minutes to answer a question. And that's the right thing. And that's good. As long as you're confident with regards to your answers, you'd be able to reduce that time from 5 minutes to 9 seconds. Or to 90 seconds, I'm sorry. Okay. So it takes conscious practice, really conscious practice. Have you heard of numbers? Have you heard of people who are famous for remembering long strings of numbers? Have you heard of those folks? Okay. So essentially, you read out a string to them, and they'll remember that, right? Um. Okay. I'm not. Yeah, I've heard about Shakuntala Devi, but I'm not sure. I'm not. I wasn't aware that she's known for this. What do you think is was the recent world record for remembering a string of numbers? How many numbers do you think someone can remember one after the other? It's about 300. I think it's slightly less than 300, but about 300. So essentially, you read 300 numbers in random order to a person, and that person can remember that. Okay, 300 two-digit numbers in random order. Okay. Most of these people who become world record holders, their initial memory, which is what we call as short-term memory, is about 8 to 9 numbers. Okay, and so people build onto this by focusing on deliberate methods to store numbers in their brain, and usually most people practice for about 11 to 12 months to get to about 150 numbers or so. So again, my point being, Don't expect yourself to be just as good or achieve that level of performance that you will achieve by the time you're ready for the test on day one, day two, or even day five. That's the wrong expectation. People who do that generally give up. Again, it's not about pi, it's about a random string of numbers. Pi is, even though pi is a random set of numbers, there's a logic to pi. You can still do it. This is a random string of numbers where someone's really saying, hey, I'm going to read out a random string of numbers to you. You're not aware of what you're going to do, and you're going to recall that string of number once I'm done reading out. Okay. Okay. So does that answer the timing question, Ravi? And I'm sure many of you have this question, and it's an important question overall. Okay. So don't expect yourself to get good on day one. In fact, if you're using a method that makes you good on day one, either you're already there or that method is not going to help you get to that 90th percentile. Okay, with that, let's do a pre-thinking exercise. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an argument. This is just an argument. Your goal is to figure out what the assumption is in this argument. In 2 minutes, you're going to read this argument. I'm actually going to give you 2.5 to 3 minutes. You're going to put in your pre-thinking, and uh, 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 then we're going to look at what you put in, and then I'm going to go use my way of doing pre-thinking. I'm going to visualize information, build that logical structure, ask that pre-thinking question, and then we're going to evaluate a few submissions. Okay. So make sure you have a pen and paper ready. Okay, before I share my argument. So get a pen and paper ready. 3, 2, and 1. Here is the argument. I'm going to mute myself. You have 3 minutes. Tell me, what does the author assume here? All right, type in your answers. Yeah, type the assumption, put the answers in. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds to put those answers in. Okay. I have some good answers. 3, 2, and 1. So about 10 to 15% of the answers are good answers here. The other ones are not so great. Some of these answers talk about the student to teacher ratio. Some of them talk about facts which are given in the argument. Some of them doubts facts that are given in the argument. But you guys can read what people are putting in, and some of them are absolutely spot on. So that's really really good. All right. With that, let's move forward here. Okay. So how do we go about approaching this? And you guys can continue reading because I've been reading this for some time. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to figure out which statement is the conclusion, and we're going to visualize that conclusion. Then we're going to build that logical structure. We're going to understand what's the basis of that conclusion, and why does the author provide those data points? How does it help him justify his claim? And then we're going to ask the pre-thinking question, and then assumptions will come to us. Now, let's talk about this pre-thinking question over here, this guy. Okay. Now, what is an assumption? An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Okay, so it satisfies this must be true conclusion, and it's not, you can't infer an assumption from the argument. Now, if you go back to that visualization where we had this essential pillar which was keeping the roof uh, upright, or preventing the roof from falling down, your assumption essentially was that essential roof overall. Now, what would happen if you remove that essential roof? The roof would cave in. Okay, or in other words, without the assumption, the conclusion will break down. So, if without the assumption, the conclusion breaks down, then if you want to figure out what the assumptions are, let's kind of figure out all the areas where the conclusion breaks down, or all the possibilities that breaks my conclusion down. Why? Because that's the job that the assumption is supposed to do. Okay. So once you figure out all the scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down, then an assumption is quite simply, a statement that really just says, hey, those scenarios are not possible. Okay. That's what it is. You figure out if my conclusion breaks down in scenario 1, 2, and 3. The assumption simply is scenario 1 is not possible, or another assumption is scenario 2 is not possible, or scenario 3. And again, remember, an argument can have multiple assumptions. Okay, let's kind of apply this. So essentially, to figure out assumptions, we're going to figure out these scenarios, the scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down. Or sorry, these scenarios, the scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down. So number 3 that I've written over here. So to figure out the scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down, we're going to ask this one falsification question. Under what circumstances, given the information or the facts in the argument, will my conclusion break down? This is the second statement that I want you to write down. That's the only other thing that I want you to write down. Write it down, please. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will my conclusion break down? So let's do this. The first thing that I wanted to answer is which statement amongst these is the main conclusion. Let me put in a poll question. Here is my poll question. Tell me which statement, according to you, is the main conclusion. Is it statement 1? Is it statement 2? Is it statement 3? Which statement is the main conclusion? I have about 80 people in the webinar. I only have, 27, 28, 38, 38. Let's get to about 50 answers. Which statement is the main conclusion? About 42. 50. I do have 50 answers. That's really good. And the proportions change as more and more people answered this. So essentially, people who are not answering are those who are not as sure of which statement is the main conclusion. And one of the things that I tell people is this is a very low risk environment, or practically a no risk environment. Why? And because the reason why we have these polls is so that we don't see your names, and so that way no one's judging you. And the benefit of putting in an answer is you get feedback that's personalized to you. You get to know where you're making a mistake. You get to know why you're making a mistake. So so um so please participate if you're spending time with us. Your participation helps everyone benefit. Those who do well, they tell themselves, "Oh, we've done well." Those who don't do well, they say, "Yeah, there are other people who are not doing just as well," which means, I'm not alone in this journey. There are others who have to learn this skill. But overall, none of this is rocket science. You can learn this, even if you don't know this today. And if you know this, then you are just further along on that journey. You still need to continue learning. Okay. With that, let's kind of broadcast results. So half of you got this right. 56% of you say statement two is your main conclusion, and you're absolutely correct. Um, 28, about 30% of you consider statement one, and then about 16% of you consider statement three to be the main conclusion. Let's start with people who say statement one. They say this word concludes, and they really say, hey, because there is the word concludes, that must be the main conclusion. Remember, a conclusion in an argument is a statement that the author wants to wants you to believe in. It's the purpose of writing the argument. It's okay, and when you look at that, the reason why the author has written this argument is statement number two, where he says clearly the difference between the professors in the tenure system and the full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system. What he's really just saying is, hey, blame the reward system for the professors. That's the reason why professors don't do as good a job. Statement number one states a conclusion which is not by the author, it is by the research paper. Again, remember, the conclusion in an argument is always by the author of the argument. Okay. Statement number one is a fact. The author actually agrees with the information provided by statement number one, and which is why he's trying to justify why statement number one happened, and which is where his conclusion comes in. Now, statement number three is support statement number two, where, when you look at statement number three, this is number three over here, this is two over here. Because three is there, it increases your belief in statement number two. Three makes two more believable. So the purpose of writing three is to strengthen two. The purpose of writing the argument is to make you believe in two, which is what makes statement number two the main conclusion. People who chose statement one or statement three, is that clear? Okay. Again, always ask yourself, why has the author written this argument? Who is the author of this argument? Okay. This is your main conclusion. So let's visualize this conclusion over here. Clearly, the difference between professors in the tenure system and the full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system. What the author is really saying is that, hey, I agree with the report's finding, and it's the reward system that professors have that is an issue. That's the reason why professors don't do as good a job. Or in other words, let's kind of visualize this and really say, hey, tenured professors, probably the reward system is such that 40% of the students who work with tenured professors show significant benefit, whereas with full-time lecturers, 70% of the students who work with full-time lecturers show significant improvement in their overall abilities. Okay. Um, all right, so that's something which is there. This is the main conclusion. This statement number one provides the context. It states the stage for the author to make his claim. And statement number three is a supporting statement that supports statement number two. Okay. So let's now ask the pre-thinking question. And this is where I want you to slow down. This is where I want you to have your full attention. Statement number, your pre-thinking question says, under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will my conclusion break down? This is a generic statement, regardless of the argument that we talk about, whether it's predictive, whether it's causal. This question remains the same. So we have to fill in two things, one and two. We have to define the conclusion breakdown criteria, and we have to fill in the facts and the argument. And let's see how we fill that in. Under what circumstances will the reward system not be responsible? Remember, this was one and this was two. And over here, let me just change my color. This is 2 over here. You can see how conclusion breakdown is reward system not be responsible. Can you see the mapping of 2 to 2 over here? When you say reward system not be responsible, you're breaking the conclusion down. Can you see that? Okay. Okay, I want to ask one other question, and then we're going to do this part again. Statement number 3. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Is it just tenured faculty, just lecturers, both, or neither? Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Okay, I want 50 answers again. I have about 30 answers: 34, 35, 37, 38, 40, 44, 48, 50, 51, 52. Again, I this is good. I really like this. Let me end the poll. Let me broadcast the results. And you can really see 75% of you are correct. It's just tenured faculty. But you can also see these 22% of folks are looking at both tenured faculty and lecturers. Let's read statement 3 again. The criterion for rewarding tenured faculty typically places greater emphasis on research than on teaching. So when you see the word greater, it's a comparative word over here. It's really saying it probably places 70% of the emphasis on research, so 70% on research and probably 30% on teaching. But we don't know anything about the reward system for full-time lecturers. We only know stuff about the reward system for tenured faculty. Now, did you have this level of clarity when you were doing pre-thinking yourself? Did you have this? No. And you need to have this level of clarity. And for those of you who, despite being prompted, were unable to answer this question, you know you need to build this core skill where you need to learn how to visualize comparatives, how to read a statement. That's something that you need to really learn and do a good job of. Okay, because unless and until you learn that, you won't be able to solve CR, you won't be able to solve RC. This is something where, in an untimed environment, in an environment where you had ample time and you were asked a very specific question, you still faltered. So this is a skill that you need to build. Okay, and this is the value of participating in surveys, because you get that feedback to say this is something that I need to build. So if you are in that category and if you're making very many similar mistakes, then it clearly tells yourself that it clearly tells shows that you need more time before you can get to that 90th percentile in CR. Why? Because there are a bunch of skills that you need to build. Okay. And having that clarity is really important, because the worst things that happens is where you say, hey, I'm going to be able to do this in about 10 days because my friend did it in about 10 days, and then and 15 days pass by and you're nowhere near that target, and that really starts to hurt you. You start thinking, hey, maybe I'm not cut out for this, maybe this is too hard for me. And then it's not, again, as I said, this is not rocket science. It's just that some of you need to build more skills, others don't. And that's where that personalization comes in. Okay, so the pre-thinking question: under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion breakdown criteria is there, where you say the reward system is not responsible for the difference in performance? What are the facts in the argument? The facts in the arguments are that full-time lecturers do a much better job, and a reward system for professors places 70% emphasis on research, or 60% on research, and 40% on teaching. A greater emphasis means more than 50% in this context. Okay. Can you see how this question is mapped? So how 1 and 2, and sorry, 2 are mapped to 2 and 1 over here. Can you guys see this? Yes, no? Okay. This is important because this is the process that we're going to go through in every question. Okay. Again, let's look at the same piece over here. What are the possible scenarios when you think about it, in which you can't blame the reward system? One of the possible scenarios is if 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 non-tenured or if lecturers have an identical reward system. Okay. If both tenured professors and lecturers have an identical reward system, then can you blame the reward system? Yes, no? No, then you can't blame the reward system, right? Or if it so happens that most tenured faculty does not act as per the reward system, if they don't care about the reward system, is if how they go about teaching has little to do with the reward system, then in that case, can you blame the reward system? No. So if these are the cases in which my conclusion breaks down, my assumptions are that non-tenured faculty should not have an identical reward system, or tenured faculty should care, or most tenured faculty should care about the reward system. Does that make sense? Does that make sense overall? Right? And this is the process that we're going to go through in every CR question, where we will talk about. We'll go through this process. We'll formulate the pre-thinking question, and the answers will jump out to us. That's something which is really essential over here. Okay. All right. So with that, we are done with the foundation of assumption. We're done with the foundation of pre-thinking. Now we're going to solve three full-length questions. And as we do this, one thing that you'll recognize is that when you do pre-thinking, uh, what starts to happen is that it channelizes your energy, your focus improves, and as your focus improves, you reject answer choices with a lot more confidence. Okay. So we're going to solve one more question, but before that, I'm going to briefly touch base on timing piece, because you've already done this. Now, one thing I want to really start with this is, this process works. If this process did not work, we would not have accounted for 60% of all 700 plus scores on GMAT plus. This data point would not exist. Okay. um, Overall. So, and we wouldn't have these many 5-star reviews as well. Okay. Now, how will you feel with regards to timing? And this is a two-dimensional chart. For those of you who got better in analytics, would probably be able to appreciate this. For those of you who are engineers, would also appreciate an aspect of this chart. Okay. What you have on y-axis is accuracy. The higher you go on y-axis, the more accurate you become. What you have on x-axis is timing. As you go more towards the right-hand side, the longer you take to solve questions. Okay. Now, this is your pre-thinking journey, or your CR journey. As you start with point number one, let's assume your time to answer questions is medium, and then this is relative, and your accuracy is low. One of the first things that would happen with pre-thinking is that your time to answer questions will increase, which is where you're going further towards the right hand side, and your accuracy will also go up. But it's going to be still within the zone, but you'll definitely see an improvement in accuracy. You'll see you're more confident with regards to the questions that you answer correctly. Okay. And at this point, a lot of people kind of put a hand on their head and really say, oh my God, I'm taking longer to answer questions. Why the hell am I doing this? I'm already worried about timing. How many of you have fallen in the at this point number two and are worried about this, and or came worried about this in this particular section? Okay. And there are people who at this point will give up and really say, hey, this is taking longer. I am not going to follow pre-thinking, because I have this other method which I know is not, it doesn't get me that many right answers, but then at least I have timing and control, and I'm going to put accuracy in, and I'm going to fix accuracy somehow using another method. How many of you do this? You kind of are tempted to do this, to really say, hey, let me just drop out. Okay, don't do that. It's a very genuine temptation. Don't do that. Because what's going to happen is, at this point in time, I want you to go slow. The key to going from point one to point three, as you continue to do this, what's going to happen is that essentially your accuracy is going to continue to improve if you're doing it right. And then your time to answer questions is going to come down. You can really see point three is towards the left of point number one on x-axis, and your accuracy, of course, you're going much further up on y-axis. But the challenge of going from one to three is that as you solve each and every question, you should be learning new things. And then as you go after 10 or 11 questions, as you go towards 12, 13, 14, or 15 questions, there should be constructs, there should be things I should have learned in the first 10 questions that you're able to apply. So your level of understanding, your level of confidence as you solve more questions should go up. As long as that clarity, that confidence is improving as you go from one to two, you're going to find yourself going from two to three automatically. If you give up on two, all that effort is going to go waste. So the indicator, the leading indicator that you're doing things right is if you're more confident when you do things right. Okay. Once you reach point number three, that's when you will have reached what I call as the hysteresis in CR. So, as I said, if you're an engineer, you would have heard of hysteresis, magnetic hysteresis. That's why you reach hysteresis in CR. You'd not go back that easily from using pre-thinking. And as you do this, you'll continue to get better. Why? Because you'll continue to learn more constructs. Your brain would continue to process information faster. Your brain would continue to eliminate mistakes. And as that happens, you're going to reach that higher level. This is what I call as the 70th percentile ability level, which is when your hard question accuracy is about 55%. This is 90th, 95th percentile, which is when your hard question accuracy is about 75% or so. Okay. Does that help with regards to timing? Okay. Does that give you more confidence to try and give pre-thinking a chance? And does that give you a litmus test to really say, how do you know if you're going on the right path if you're taking longer? Okay. But again, remember that understanding should go up. If that's not going up, then you're not reading the solutions well enough. Okay. The more time per question that you invest in one and two, the more time per question that you invest, not just while solving, but also while reviewing the solutions, the faster you will go from two to three, because the more you learn from every question. Okay. Vinay has a great question. He says, typically I find myself getting a much higher accuracy when I solve CR and SC questions without writing anything down than when I write something down. I feel that this is because I lose concentration over my visual passage when I write something down, as I end up looking at the paper while I write. Would you still recommend that I focus on writing things down to get to the 90th percentile mark? Okay. It's a great question. I am really glad that you asked this question. Okay. Now, I'm not in front of you. I'm not looked at when you write things down and when you don't, but I'm going to make what I call as a hypothesis. I'm going to take a guess based on my experience. Okay. Um, First of all, that data point that he researched, what Vinay is saying is there are questions where he doesn't write anything down and he gets them right with much higher accuracy. And there are questions that he writes things down, and this is where he makes more mistakes. Okay. And he's saying maybe, and so this is data point, and data is something that's very difficult to refute. Okay. The causality behind that data is something that we always have to focus on. And what he's saying is maybe the reason why that happens is because that very act of writing takes his focus away from the question itself, and that's when he loses his concentration, loses his train of thought, and essentially that's why he makes mistakes. Absolute possibility, that's something that's there, but probably not likely, especially when if you are in that 60th 70th percentile ability level. Most likely, and by the way, what that data point that you're really talking about is something that happens with me. It's something that happens with Pile. We also make mistakes, and for questions for which we write things down, our accuracy is lower than for questions that we do using our brain. Okay. And which is for pretty much everyone out there. Okay. Now, why does this happen? It's about you are comparing entities which are non-comparable. Now, questions that where we don't feel the need to write things down are questions that our brain can comprehend. They have structures that our brain has already seen, which is why it can breeze through it, because they have structures that our brain has already seen, because they're not overloading our brain. So of course we're going to get them right with much higher accuracy, because we've probably seen the traps over there. We can visualize information much more easily over there. The very need to write down information comes from the fact that we see a construct of language that we have never seen before. So our brain really asks us to slow down, which is where we write things down. And because we've not seen this before, because this is new, so there may be hidden traps that we may not be able to decode even when we are writing things down. So of course we're more prone to making mistakes over there. Okay. However, if on in this category of questions, if you don't write things down, you're going to find that accuracy is going to go even lower for that particular category. Okay, because essentially, if you don't write things down, you'll overwhelm your brain, and essentially you're going to find that even those mistakes that you would have decoded by writing things down, you're not able to decode because you let your brain become overwhelmed. Okay, so you shouldn't write things down for the sake of writing things down. You should write things down to prevent your brain from becoming overloaded. Okay. So does that answer your question? Again, I'm just drawing my hypothesis, but most like, because this happens with everybody. Um, but again, essentially, when a question presents a new construct which you've never seen before, you will want to write things down, and you might make some mistakes there, but that's what the learning opportunity is. Okay. And do that experiment, essentially, for such questions where your brain says I've got to write things down, don't write things down and see what happens to the mistakes. My hypothesis is that they will go up. What open sources, Ravi says, what open sources can we tap for preparation specifically for SC and CR? If you're an e-GMAT student, you shouldn't go for open sources. If you're not an e-GMAT student, you can solve the OG, but again, make sure you're learning with every question, because the process of learning is a very intricate process. There's a lot of science behind it. Okay, and that's one of the reasons why business schools exist. A lot of people think, hey, business schools exist to give you a degree, but business schools exist to build, and essentially, it's not about any special knowledge. A lot of people say, hey, it's about networking that happens through business schools. But again, one of the things that you have to ask yourself is, if that were true, why would companies such as Amazon, McKinsey, and others not create assessments which would figure out, hey, who all are skilled enough, uh, people who've not gone to business schools, or who all are skilled enough, and would hire them at much lower pay grades. Why? Because when they hire someone from a B school, they have to pay about 170, 180K as starting salaries, at least in the US. Okay. Um, in other words, what I want to really say is, if you could learn information from, if most people could learn information from stuff that's out there free of charge, then B schools won't exist, because B school professors publish way more information than anyone else publishes. Um, okay, so it's when you go to a business school, and this kind of goes to another piece over there. A lot of people come to me and really say, "Hey, how do I go about choosing a business school? This school costs less versus this one costs more." And my answer to those guys is, you know, I don't care about rankings. When it comes to B schools, I care about two things. One is what is the quality of professors that teach at that business school, because you're going to learn from them. The second thing that I care about is essentially, um, what is the relationship between that school and the industry, because the strength of that relationship is essentially what's going to get you that first job, and that's where you're going to continue your learning post your MBA. The case in point, for example, how many of you have heard of a school called Tuck? How many of you have heard of it? Okay. How many of you are aware that despite the fact that Tuck is in the middle of nowhere, it has had the strongest employment record for the last 22 years? I mean, throughout the rest, everyone gets jobs when economy is great, but Tuck graduates get to 95% employment even when the economy is bad. Okay. 2002, 2003 recession, Tug graduates got 95%. 2008, 2009, 2010 recession, Tug graduates got job, 95% placement. Harvard could not achieve that. Stanford could not achieve that. Tuck achieved that. Okay. And the reason for that is it's the strength of its alumni. If there's one school that I would rank as the highest among alumni, uh, 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 having looked at this industry all throughout, it would be Tuck. Okay. One of those things that you don't know about schools over here. Okay. It's probably the most recession proof school. All right. Here's what some people said. There's a guy who got 740. He says, understand the passage completely. Take time to pre-think. Probably this one word will have the most impact on your GMAT score. Another guy who said, answer CR questions as if there are no answer choices. Pre-thinking is a game changer. And when it comes to those 700 level questions, they need to do pre-thinking. Why? Because it helps you focus on the logic and not deviate from trap or out of scope answer choices. One of my best comments was by one of our former students who currently is an associate director at McKinsey, and he about 3 years ago he wrote back to me and really say, "Hey Rajat, remember we talked about pre-thinking? We do a lot of pre-thinking in our work at McKinsey. Essentially, you should tell people if you want to get into consulting, learn pre-thinking." Okay. Here's a guy who went from 520 to 740, a 220-point improvement. He says, pre-thinking primes the mind. We're constantly on our toes while reading a paragraph or a CR question stem. Apart from comprehending the passage, we speculate which direction is the passage will orient and what logical jump has the author taken. Okay. Again, you have to go through this journey. If you don't go through this journey, you haven't learned enough. Okay. All right. Get your pen and paper ready. We're going to apply pre-thinking to a few more questions now. All right, highway miles. Uh, So here is the question. Here's the poll. Focus on doing pre-thinking before you look at answer choices. Otherwise, this question will mess you up. It looks like an easy question. The answer choices will look really close if you don't focus on pre-thinking. Okay. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, I'm going to give you another 15 seconds. Get those answers in. Five, four, three, two, and one. Let me end the poll. All right. I'm going to broadcast results so you guys can see how you guys did. Put in my short answer pod. How did you feel about this question? How did you feel about this question? Easy, okay. Tricky. For those of you saying tricky, what was tricky about it? And for those of you saying easy or medium, put in the choice that you chose that you selected. Tricky E. Okay, easy moderate. B versus E. I don't see very many people putting in B or C or D. Okay, pre-thinking with symbols. So this is one of those questions where if you do not pre-think, you're gonna it's gonna mess your brain up. And it's actually this is a question which it's an excellent way to cement the concept of must be true. So let's kind of look at what's going on over here. So the argument says in order to finance road repairs, the Highway Commission is considering a 50% increase on toll, and the toll currently is um, is 10 cents per mile. So we're looking at a 50% increase, and that's 10 cents per mile. Okay. Then the commissioner makes a claim. He says that, hey, as we do this 50% increase, we're going to look at the total revenue, the annual revenue generated by the toll highway. We're going to increase that by about 50%. So that's the claim. So, and we've got to visualize this, which is to really say last year, if the revenue generated was about $10 million, this year it's going to be at least $15 million or $15.1 million or so, because it's going to increase by at least 50%. Okay, so it could be more, it could be 16, 17, 18, 20, 25, 100, but at least 50. So my question is, how do we estimate annual revenue given this argument? How do we estimate annual revenue? What's the formula for annual revenue here? Okay, someone says number of trips made on the toll high. Where does where do we see trips here? Price time trips. Where do we see trips in the argument? Cost per mile times total miles. That's perfect. Annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by the total number of toll miles. That's annual revenue. Is that clear for everyone? Is that clear to everyone? This is what annual revenue is, right? Okay. Now we ask the same pre-thinking question. What we know is that toll per mile, we're going to increase this by 50%. The question that we ask is, under what circumstances would the annual revenue not increase by at least 50% provided that the toll per mile has gone up by 50%? What's the only scenario in which this will not go up by 50%? What's the only other scenario? Where do you see trips here? If the miles decrease, the total number of miles decrease. Do you see trips in this equation at all? Do you see trips here? No. If the total distance traveled decreases, yes. I mean, and that's the value of pre-thinking. It keeps your focus on the information given in the argument, and that's why you've got to do pre-thinking before you look at answer choices. Because CR answer choices are notorious when it comes uh, to providing you unnecessary but tempting information, and that's what happens here. Okay, so the only other scenario is if the total number of miles decreases. If that decreases, then we have a problem. So the assumption is that the total number of miles driven does not decrease. That's basically it. Okay, and which is in line with choice E. Now, what happens with choice B? How do we justify choice B? Choice B says the total number of trips made on the toll highway will not decrease from this year. Now, remember, what's the definition of an assumption? What is the definition of an assumption? An assumption is what? An unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold valid. Right? New info plus my MBT. That's good. That's a good short way of really saying that. Now, if the number of trips decreases, okay, so let's say last year we had 1,000 trips. Now, this year, because of the increased toll, we have 900 trips. Does it necessarily mean that the total distance travel will go down? No. What could compensate for it? If longer trips, miles per trip might increase, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that the total miles travel will reduce. Why? Because of the number of miles per trip increases. So is choice B a must be true? No. Okay. Choice B is an excellent strengthener, but not an assumption. People who chose choice B, can you see the difference between what an assumption is and what a strengthener is? Choice B definitely increases your belief in the conclusion, but it's not an assumption. It's not a must be true. People who chose choice B, is that clear why choice B is wrong? Folks who chose choice B. Yes, yes. Okay, perfect. I'll display all choices, yes. Let's look at choice E. Choice E talks about the total distance. That's true. And choice E is the correct answer. Let's look at choice C. Average length of the trip. What can compensate for average length of trip? More trips. If the length of trip goes down from 20 miles per trip to 18, you could get more trips, which is why choice C is wrong. People who chose choice C, is that clear? What's not clear? You say unclear. Can I explain again? Okay. What's your revenue is written there. Annual revenue is toll per mile into the total number of toll miles. That's absolute truth, right? If the average length of trip goes down from 20 miles per trip to 18 miles per trip, so there's about a 10% reduction over here, then what if you have 20% more trips? You could possibly have 20% more trips to compensate for that. So which means it is not required that the average length of trip remains the same. It's not a must be true statement. Okay. The toll is already, I think, given to us. It's going to go up by 50%. So there is there's no further change in toll. It's a total number of toll miles. That's what we are playing with. And that is a product of number of trips times the length of trips over here, and so both of these is what it makes. So if the trips go down, length could make up for it. If the length goes down, the number of trips could make up for it. That's there. So neither one of them is a must be true. The product by itself should not go down. Okay, here are all the answer choices, and you can see choices B, C, D. All three of them are strengtheners. Choice D says the number of drivers who consistently avoid the toll highway. Okay. Why is choice D wrong? Let's say earlier 1,000 drivers avoided the toll highway. Now 1,100 drivers avoid the toll highway. What could compensate for uh, for more drivers avoiding the toll highway? Both more trips or longer trips, right? Both B and C could compensate for more drivers avoiding the toll highway. Is that clear? Again, you've got to visualize what that answer choice is saying to begin with before making a judgment on whether that answer choice is correct or not. Really important. If you don't look at what that answer choice is saying. So this current answer choice is saying is last year 1,000 drivers avoided toll highway. This year 1,100 would avoid toll highway. So this means, let's say we only have 900 drivers that use the toll highway throughout the year. Will that mean that the total number of miles driven would go down? Not necessarily. Why? Because what if those 900 start to take more trips? What if they start to take longer trips? Either way, the total number of miles driven would go up. Okay. So, what was difficult about this question? One was a focused application of must be true. Really important. You've got to do this. But the second thing was you had to visualize the answer choices and really say what conditions what restrictions do they put, and what are the other parameters that I still have to play with. Okay. And that's something which is really, really important. This question is no different than a kind of question where you would go about that you would ponder post your MBA, where you say, hey, what if we try and reduce the price of a product by about 10%? Does it mean that our overall revenue will go down? And the answer, the question that you would ask is, if I reduce my price by 10 to 15%, well, I get 35% more customers. Okay. And this is I mean, that's kind of the same sensitivity analysis that you're doing over here. Is that clear? Question 3. What are your key takeaways? What behavior changes are you going to do to make sure you get more such questions, you answer more such questions correctly? You're going to do pre-thinking. What else? What else? Or the other thing that um, another way to ask this question is, why did you make a mistake? And what are you going to do to avoid that mistake? Put numbers, visualize, frame specific questions. Um, and let me just say this. You may call this a quant based question, but this is a logic based question. You have two entities that are interacting with one another and that are moving in opposite directions. Most questions are like this. Practice MBT scenarios. Good. Be explicit in logic. And it's really important to write these things down on your pen and paper, because the next two questions that you're going to solve are uber difficult questions. If you were to go through the e-GMAT course, these would not be the first questions you would see. Why? Because these are questions that we would want to put towards the end. But the reason why I have these questions that you're going to see next in the webinar is because I want to demonstrate to you, if you apply pre-thinking in a methodical way, even these questions become easy. Okay. I also want to emphasize the importance of following the process, starting with visualizing the information and then focusing on pre-thinking. Okay. So because these are uber difficult questions, what I am going to do is, I'm going to give you longer to solve these questions. So the process that we're going to follow, and this is something that we do in quant really diligently, is I want you guys to select not answers. I want 30 of you to select not answered. And that way, when you choose an answer choice other than not answered, I know you are done, and that's when I will call time. So that way, I won't be the one timing you. You as a group will be the one timing yourself. 30 people to say not answered. 30 people. I only have 23 people. 30 people. Perfect. That's good. Let me remove not answered and remove broadcast results. And here is your first question. This is a really difficult question. Slow down, read and visualize every word before you move forward. Okay, I'm going to mute myself now. All right, guys, about 70% of the class is done. I'm going to give you another 15 seconds. Get those answers in. Three, two, and one. Last chance. Right? I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. This is how you guys are. This is a difficult question. I understand that we're going to discuss this. This is probably the most challenging question many of you will face on the GMAT. Again, the next question, not answered. I want to see 30 people say not answered before I show the next question, and then we'll discuss both these questions together, and then have our takeaways. 2021. Let's get to 30 people saying not answered. Good. Here is the question. Good luck, guys. All right. About 75% of the class is done. Actually, 85 is done right now. So those answers in 3, 2, and 1. I'm gonna end the poll. Broadcast the results. You guys did. I mean, this is much better in this question than the previous one. That's really good. But both these questions, 700 actually. So there's a 750 level. There were a 750 level on the GMAT. There'd be those 750 level questions. How did you feel? How was it answering these questions? Okay, second one was definitely easier than the first one, but again, nevertheless, it was really difficult as well. Your head hurts. Good. That's growth. If your head hurts, it's growth. If your head doesn't hurt, then you have an issue. It's your head hurting, your head being starting getting to that point where you say, "Man, I'm really pushing my boundaries." It's the same way as your muscles hurting after a workout, and that's kind of where we are. We are towards the back end of that workout, and your head and your muscles, or your brain muscles, should hurt. Okay. All right. So, are we ready to start analyzing these questions? Perfect. So, reset your brain, take a deep breath, because the first question has a lot of moving pieces, and we've got to control those moving pieces. Yep. Good. And yes, option choices in the RDS question are convoluted. Okay. And some of you will not understand them even after I explain the answer choices. But then if you go download the PDF, do attempt the question again yourself after this, you're gonna get it. That's my promise. Okay. So let's visualize the conclusion. The conclusion is saying the number of V's, I'm not going to call these wordlanders as there's no point, using the full name. The number of V's receiving special program information did not increase significantly during this time period. Okay. Uh, uh, so what it's really saying is, so two things. One is this I this conclusion is only about V's, which means we're not talking about people who come from outside. The second thing is this is only talking about special program information. This is not talking about generic programs. This is not talking about programs that do not provide this SPI. It's only about this. And what this is saying is between 94 and 96, if let's say 1 million people receive special program information in 94, then in 96 that number was more or less, maybe about 10,000 here or there, more or less 1 million in 96 as well. Is that clear to everyone? Just the conclusion? Okay, that's kind of how you should have looked at it. And always treat the conclusion independently, visualize it independently. Okay, let's kind of look at this. I'm going slightly forward, slightly quickly. So you have this the conclusion over here, and there's a reason why the author arrives at this conclusion. What are the reasons? First is the number of RDS equipped radios in 96 and 94 were the same. So again, if the RDS equipped radios in 94 were, let's say, 500K, 500,000, then the RDS equipped radios in 96 were also about the same number, 500K. But the number of transmitting stations more than doubled. I mean, it went from 250 to 600. So these radio towers that are transmitting, they more than doubled overall. Okay. So that's something that happened, and you can really see that there's a however connecting these two statements, and because of the however connecting these two statements, you can see they kind of are in contrast to each other. If you see more transmitting towers, you would probably expect more radios, you'd see more people receiving this, but that's not the case. So in other words, what you can also infer from this is that if statement 3 supports my conclusion, statement 2 kind of goes against my conclusion. Okay. Um, the other piece which is there is statement number 1 says It sets some context. It says if you want to receive this special program information, you need two things. You need a radio with the RDS technology, and you also need a transmitting tower with the same technology. So that you need to have a metered system. It's like saying that if you want to receive use apps that require 5G, you need a 5G cell phone and you need a 5G transmitting station. Let me just hide this. I wanted to get in my poll. Is the argument clear? Let me. Okay. Gautam says, doesn't it? Sorry, I meant was that verses are not directly proportional to people with radius. I don't want to use the word proportional, Gautam. It's a very specific usage when you use the word directly proportional. It's the incremental increase with one versus the other. Okay. Um, probably, uh, probably this the author is making a claim that it's a future claim. It's making a claim. So he's really saying, hey, given all of this information, my guess is that that essentially the number of people receiving special program information did not increase, did not change a whole lot, given what's given to me. The argument would still remain the same, without probably in there. How is statement 2 and statement 3 contrasting? Okay. Would anyone like to explain why is it that statement 2 and statement 3, how are they contrasting? Or not directly. Yeah, one side something is increasing, you would expect the other side to increase as well. I mean, in reality, if you would see someone investing in 5G radio towers and putting a lot more of those, then you would also want to like to see a supply of increase of cell phones. Okay. So it's not that this is leading, this should have directly led to it, but the general expectation is that. Okay. So it's more about the general expectations, or you can say even though. And this is nice about having a group such as this, where you get to apply essentially what you've learned over here. So you could replace however with even though, you could and then this statement would even would then have a much more clear meaning. Okay. You could also replace however with but in this case. All right, so let's kind of build that logical structure. All the same four statements here, the logical structure here. You have the context. You need a mated pair to receive RDS programming. From 94 to 96, the number of RDS radios, which means radios that people have, that remained more or less unchanged. But the number of transmitting stations went up tremendously. And based on that, we have a conclusion that very few additional people received RDS programming. The number of people in 94 and the number of people in RDS, both those numbers remain more or less the same. Okay, so we're going to ask the same question. Under what conditions will there be a significant addition to the number of people receiving RDS programming? Which means way more people receive, way more Verlanders receive RDS programming, despite the fact that we have very few additional radios, but we have a lot more transmitting stations. Okay. Can you tell me some possible scenarios in which my conclusion will break down? If the number of people per radio go up, yes, number of people per radio go up. Okay. If that's one thing, and if the other one catered to areas not catered earlier but had RDS. If there were people who already had the RDS radio in 94, but they did not have coverage, but now we give them coverage, that's when this starts to happen. Okay. So the two possible scenarios, or filling the gap between, filling the gap between premise and conclusion, I don't like that. I want to be more specific. Um, so there are two additional scenarios. If you have these new stations where people had the radio but no coverage, and this, if you start putting these radios in Starbucks, so number of people per radio go up, or if the variety of programming improves so that even in a certain house, more than one person is listening to those radios. Can you see both these scenarios break my conclusion down? Yes, no. Both these scenarios break my conclusion down, right? Look at it. This is where the learning is. This is where you need to slow down, look at this and say, hey, yes, this makes sense. I mean, logically, is this complex? This is fairly simple logic. You have a system that's transmitting information, you have more radio towers, and then we're really just saying, hey, in what scenario will as we put more radio towers, will we reach more people? One is if more people per unit radio go up, we start putting them in Starbucks, and the other is if this increases coverage. So, how do you increase the number of overlanders? It's about number of people reached. Let's kind of let me just type it out. I mean, the way to think about this is let me just go over here. Let me see if RDS technologies are there. Okay. So, how do you estimate? One is it's the number of people who receive special programming is a product of one number of people covered, okay, multiplied by number of radios covered, right? It's as simple as that. How many radios do we cover, and what is the people per radio? And frankly, the argument allows us to increase both. We can't increase the number of radios, that's a constraint that's given to us, but we can really just say the number of radios covered. Is that clear? Very similar to um, our question on highway miles, right? Now, some of you said, what if there are other devices? Okay. Does the argument allow us to have other devices that can receive RDS programming? No. You can see the word only over here. Okay. And this is where that's really important. You in a CR argument, if it gives you constraints, you can't go outside of those constraints. Okay. So if these are the possible scenarios that break my conclusion down, then my assumptions are the new radio stations don't increase in do not insignificantly increase coverage, and the people per radio remain the same. And yes, when I say radios, RDS radios, yes. And that's kind of over here. Number of RDS radios remain unchanged. Gotham. Everyone clear with the assumptions? Again, or most of you clear with the assumptions. And as I said, not everyone will understand this right away, but then most of you will. Okay. Perfect. But you can also see as you solve these difficult questions, it furthers your mental ability, and it leads to more connections in your brain. Okay, so let's go through answer choice analysis, and before that, I'm going to share the poll. Where is my poll? RDS Technologies. Here is the poll. This is how you guys answered. Choice A is the correct answer. 25% of you got this right. Let's look at why choice A is the correct answer. Okay, choice A says few, if any, of RDS equipped radios that began broadcasting after 94 broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously covered. So this is a complex answer choice. We're going to decode this piece by piece. Remember, I said every time you read a statement, before you ask whether it's correct or not, make sure you kind of decode it, understand what that statement is saying. Few, if any, means almost none. Okay, of the RDS equipped radios that began broadcasting after 1994, these are the new radio stations. This is what these are. Broadcast to people with RDS radios living in areas not previously reached. That's the same as increasing the coverage of RDS programming. Okay, so that's what this is. All right. So I'm thinking, what if I can't come up with the scenarios? Okay. First of all, doubts on this question? This answer choice, not this question. I'm going to go through every answer choice. This is in line with our pre-thinking, and this is the correct answer. When you negate this, you say at least some new radio stations increase coverage where people had the radios but did not have coverage earlier, and that breaks my conclusion down. Yep. Now, what if you can't come up with these scenarios? Okay. Um, that's a great question. And there will be arguments where you can't come up with scenarios. But even when you can't come up with very specific scenarios, you'd be able to come up with, hey, it would be something which really talks about that these radio stations will reach people who actually did not reach. Something like that. Or something which talks about these new radio stations, despite not these despite uh, fewer RDS radios, a similar number of RDS radios, somehow these new radio stations lead to more people getting RDS programming. Something like that is, you'd be able to create an approximate scenario in your brain. And because if you visualize this, if you the whole point of visualizing the argument is, and the whole point of creating that logical structure is that you can understand the relationships that the author is using to arrive at his conclusion. Because because if you can understand those relationships, you can pre-think. Now if you cannot understand those relationships, then even when you read the answer choices, you won't be able to figure out the correct answer anyway. Okay, so if you can't think of scenarios, then this means, what have you not understood? If you can't think of scenarios, then what have you not understood? No, logical structure. Pre-thinking is a very small step. Let me just be very clear. The first step is visualizing statements. The second is building that logical structure. The third is thinking of scenarios. Then you can't understand what the conclusion is and what is happening to lead to it. So go back and really build that logical structure again. Go do that in your mind, and that's, the more you do it in that learning mode, the better you will get at it. The better you will get at it, the better you will do it in the first shot. Okay. Now there are questions today, and as I say, all of us are in that phase of learning. Pyle and I constantly are in that phase of learning. Okay. It's very similar to, I don't know if you've heard this thing. It says a lamp cannot give light if it isn't burning itself. And a teacher cannot teach if he or she is not learning himself or herself. And that's the same. If we're not learning ourselves, we don't. Our ability to impart learning, our ability to come up with new things does not increase. So that's really, really important. Okay. How does this break the conclusion? If you had these people who had the right kind of radio sets but had no coverage, but then you added these new radio stations in those areas and that increased coverage, then yes, number of people receiving RDS programming has gone up. Okay. Or in other words, let me just share a new whiteboard. So let's kind of bring this over here. Okay. So let's say you had this area overall, and you had, these are your people who are everywhere in this case. These are people, Verlanders. Now, in the earlier piece, with the earlier piece, you only had these people where all the radio stations were. Now, if the new radio stations are also put over here in 96, then clearly the number of Verlanders receiving special program information, that number has gone up, because in 94, you only had these people. Okay. Does that make sense? The person who says, how does this increase coverage? Okay. All right. Let's look at choice B. Does that make sense? But there was someone who says, how does that increase coverage? Okay. Now, when I'm going to come back to your question towards the end, let's just go here. Let's look at choice B. Choice B says, in 1996, more Verlanders who lived within the listening area of an RDS station already had a radio equipped to receive RDS. Okay. What's my definition of an assumption? What is my definition of an assumption? It must satisfy the must be true condition. New information that satisfies must be true. Okay. Now let's kind of play on this word most over here. Okay, let's play on this word most over here. Okay. What this choice is saying, and then let's translate this choice. What this choice is saying is in 1996, most, let's say most is 60%. 60% of all world landers had an RDS radio. Okay. Now, tell me one thing. For the conclusion to hold true, is it required that 60% of all world landers who had coverage to have an RDS radio? Or in other words, if 20% had an RDS radio in 1994 and the same 20% had an RDS radio in 96, then would my conclusion still not be true? Is this most required? Is that a must be true? No, it's not required. It's not a must be. This is very similar to those strengthening answer choices that are there in that highway miles question. Okay. Equipping a radio station with RDS technology does not decrease the station's listening area. Completely irrelevant to us. Why? Because without RDS technology, stations can't even transmit RDS programming. So if this happens to decrease the listening area, it's only going to decrease the listening area of non-RDS programming, kind of programming we don't really care about. Okay. Let's look at choice D. Choice D is a really tempting choice, but it's a really easy choice to reject, and many of you chose choice D. Okay. Choice D says in 1996, Verlanders who did not own radios equipped to receive RDS. It talks about a segment of people who we don't care about, could not receive any programming. It talks about a programming we don't care about. We only care about RDS programming. We only care about people who have RDS radios. Okay, so it's absolutely irrelevant. A lot of people who choose this kind of really say, what if a new technology is invented that circumvents RDS and blah, 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 blah. They forget the constraint that's there in the argument. You need RDS radio to receive RDS programming. Okay, so it's wrong for two reasons. People who chose choice D, everything correct, everything clear about choice D. Why choice D is wrong? People who misunderstood choice D and chose choice D. A lot of people chose choice D. 25% of the class chose choice D. Man, what's happening to the energy level? I'm the one who's talking. I know, I do understand you're the one who's learning, but this is where you look at that last ounce of energy. You kind of go seek that last ounce and get there, because this is where those muscles are being built. This is where those neural connections are being made. Come on. This is what separates that 75 percentile and from that 90 or 90th percentile student from that 75th percentile. These connections. Is choice D clear? Yes, no. All right. Cool. That's a great point. You see, I'm having difficulty understanding long answer choices. That is an excellent statement to say. Why? Because now you know this is something that you need to slow down on, read, and visualize. Because if you have that difficulty, then you also have a difficulty understanding convoluted arguments, and which is something that you're going to face as you go towards difficult questions. So if you're an e-GMAT student, go back to that inference module, because that's where we have convoluted statements. Choice E is all wrong. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to and getting lost in such long sentences. Absolutely, you will get lost. That's why they are there, and which is where you need to build that skill. You know, if you build that skill, you'll get so much better in critical reasoning. Okay. Vinay says, Vinay is a person who actually had this question, which says, hey, should I write things down? Should I not? And he says, I have a quick follow up question. He says, I got both these questions right, but for question number one, and I didn't write anything down, but in question number one, I had to read the question again. That's what I'm inferring, Vinay. Because what you said is, I found the first question to be convoluted and I misunderstood the meaning of the passage when I read it the first time. Because you said I read it the first time, this means you read it a second time as well. And the good thing is, uh, 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 his question is, should I have written it down? So the good thing is, because you have a sense of right versus wrong, even when you don't understand the passage, you have the good decision making sense to go back and read the passage again till you understand it. Now, had you written it down the first time, would you have understood the passage right in the first go? Probably yes, but again, you have to do this as an experiment for yourself. I can say for myself that would have happened, yes, because I do the same process. So because it seems you're a high ability student, and because you follow the same process that I do when I don't write down, sometimes I get lazy, I don't write things down, and I have to go back as well, because I have that clear judgment of when I've understood a passage and when I have not. So when I've not understood a passage, I know there's no point looking at the answer choices. Let me just go back and reread the argument again, and then I'm slow, I'm more deliberate, and I understand it. Okay. Now I also know I'm faster when I write things down, when I'm not lazy. Okay. Do you need to do a negation test after pre-thinking? Um, uh, do you necessarily need to? Initially, you should do it. Again, it builds your skill, but then you get so confident as with time that you won't need to do that. How do you negate such long answer choices? Step one, simplify. Step two, negate. That's it. Just anything that's long, you break it down. That's what it is. That's what you learn during your MBA. That's what I'm going to teach you. That's something that will help you build your skills. Shelby will refuse. You guys did much better. 54% of the class got this right. I want to make sure, I'm going to go through this question very quickly. I want to make sure that you get it right for the right reasons. Yes, we did discuss choice C in the previous question already. Yes. Okay. All right. So what happened last year over here? Last year we got refused. We did not recycle anything. We burned everything. So let's assume one trash can is one truck. How many trucks did we incinerate last year? Can you count the number of trash cans and tell me how many trucks did we incinerate last year? 10 trucks. Yes. Everyone can see 10. Now this year we're going to separate stuff for recycling, and we're going to send some for incineration. Now my simple question to you is, if this year we collect 10 times as much refuse so as last year, so if this garbage collected this year, this is 10x as much. In that case, how many trucks do you think will be sent for recycling? For incineration, not recycling, I'm sorry. How many trucks will be sent for incineration this year if we collect 10 times as much refuse? Read the argument, focus on the argument, then answer this question. Very simple. This is just read and translate. If I collect 10 times as much refuse, how many trucks will I send for incineration this year? 3, 2. Come on, guys. I need more participation. I have 45 people here. I only have what, 20 answers? Come on. How many trucks am I going to send for incineration if I collect 10 times as much refuse? 16, 25. Let's get to at least 30. How many trucks am I sending for incineration this year? 3, 2, and 1. All right. Let me end the poll. and broadcast the results. As you can see, we had what 17, 20, 24, 27 people who responded. The correct answer is just 5 trucks. And you can see only 27, 26, only a quarter of you got this right. Why is it just 5 trucks despite 10 times as much refuse? Look at this slide. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to half of last year's number. Okay, what they're saying is regardless of how much garbage you collect, we are only going to send half as many trucks as we sent last year. So if last year we sent 10 trucks, this year we're going to send 5. Even if you collect 100 trucks worth of refuse. Can you see that? It does not depend on how they're doing recycling. What they're saying is we are only going to send half as many trucks. If your boss asks you to create a business plan and say, assume that you're going to get $10 million in funding and create a business plan that gives me returns of 25% year on year with a growth rate of 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 18% with a starting revenue of $2 million, then you have to assume that you're going to get those $10 million of funding regardless of how the company is doing. But how can they be sure that 50% is recyclable? Do you care if given this data point? If they're telling you this year city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce, how will they ensure? We don't care. What do we care about? What's gonna burn? What's gonna come for recycling? For incineration. Why? Because incineration generates refuse. Okay, that proportion. Do you really see the statement? This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse. Do you see the word enough refuse? Do you see the word enough refuse over here? Okay. Again, read and understand, read and visualize. That's what that's tricking you on. That's why I said fundamental skills, visualizing information to building that logical structure. Okay. Now, yes, half of last year, not half of this year, half of last year's number. Okay. So we asked the same pre-thinking question. Under what conditions will the ash generated be greater than 50% if I only get half as many trucks? What's the only condition in which my conclusion will break down if I'm only getting half as many trucks? What's the only condition? If the incineration per truck increases, yes. If only we stuff those trucks so much that each truck's generating way more ash. Okay. Which means the assumption is that the ash per truckload is going to be similar or lower than what it was last year. Okay. Everyone can see this pre-thinking here? Everyone can see this? Yes, no? Perfect. Let's look at these answer choices. Answer choice A says, this year, no materials that city services would separate for recycling, that'd be incinerated. In other words, recyclable material will not be burned. Yes, is this must be true? Absolutely. Does it provide new information? Absolutely not. Because it doesn't provide new information, this one is wrong. Okay. Does it mean the refuse comprises of the same composition? Absolutely not. All it's saying is you're going to get half as many trucks. That's it. Choice B talks about the cost. We don't care about the cost. Choice C talks about the proportion of recyclable materials. Do we care about the proportion of recyclable materials? No, absolutely not. Why are we only going to get half as many trucks? What we get for incineration is what we are going to incinerate. That's given to us in the argument. We don't care about whether it's a larger or a smaller or a similar proportion of recyclable materials. Do we? No. Why? Because whatever comes to us, it may have some recyclable materials. I still have to burn. It's coming in a truck, I'm going to burn it. Right? Choice D is in line with our pre-thinking. It talks about ash per truckload, and that's the correct answer. Let's look at choice E. Choice E talks about the total quantity of refuse collected. Again, does it matter? Absolutely not. We already saw if you even collect 10 times as much refuse, doesn't matter. Why? Because I'm only going to get half as many truckloads. And that's the value of visualization. That's the value of building that logical structure. And that's the value of pre-thinking overall. This is a 700, 750 level question. If you look at this question on GMAT Club, you'll see 4 pages of doubts where people are talking about choices C and E. How can we ensure that? Why? Because they haven't read that last statement overall. So, how do you become a CR champ? This is a process. This is not something that you can do in a day, but this is not rocket science either. As long as you can visualize statements, as long as you can build the logical structure, pre-thinking is very simple. It's not rocket science. Okay. If you build pre-thinking, if you follow the process, that 90th percentile is right there. You want to see the answer choices? This is how you guys polled. Shelby will refuse. Here is how you guys polled. You can really see how you polled by yourself. Okay. So how do you build that 90th percentile ability? Okay, I'm going to hide this over here. You've got to start from miss one keyword and it's gone. Yes, that's true. You have to start from the very basics. You have to learn how to visualize and classify statements. Then you have to build the logical structure overall. So which is where argument structure and pre-thinking comes in. Then you have to understand the answer choices. And essentially, if you do that, you follow the process, you're going to be able to answer every question correctly. If you make a mistake, it's going to be either here or here or here or here. And you have to build all of this in sequence. Understand how to read statements, understand how to visualize the conclusion, understand how to build that logical structure, and do pre-thinking, and then understand how to reject answer choices. It's really important you do it in this particular sequence overall. And if you achieve mastery on all grounds, there's no reason you would make a mistake on any CR question. Okay. But you've got to do this one step at a time, which is where, when you think about the e-GMAT course, we start with premise and conclusion, and then we start with inference. For those of you who've gone through the inference module, this is our inference module. It's the longest module in the CR course. Okay. There's about 12 odd hours of content right here in this particular module. Why? Because it teaches you how to visualize information. How many of you, when you were going through the inference module, said, why the hell is there so much information in inference? I likely just see one question from inference module. How many of you thought that when you were going through the inference module? Why so many learning activities there? Why do we have 12 hours? Okay. Really, really important you go through this. Really, really important you do this, because all of those things that you said, hey, I'm having difficulty reading complex statements. What do you do with statements with two verbs? All of that's covered over here. So when it comes to reading either the argument or the answer choices, this is going to be here. Building fundamentals and logical structure. This is where the assumption module is. You have some of these files in the free trial, but the overall actual assumption course is way more comprehensive. You can really see different kind of arguments here, arguments that test pure logical gap, argument where you have comparison of two entities, um, arguments where you're comparing segments, we're doing both entities and segments, and quant related arguments, and then you have application and practice quizzes. Okay, that's really, really important. Now, should you read the question stem before reading the passage? It's completely up to you. Once you build the mental ability to comprehend more information, then yes, you should read the question stem because it does save you about 5 to 7 seconds. But it has absolutely no bearing on whether you're going to answer questions correctly. It just is a slight time saver. That's it. Okay. Um, Again, as you go through the assumption module, in the context of assumption, you will do all four one after the other in a sequence. Then you'll cement those skills. You'll continue to apply those skills. So with assumption and inference, you have all the building blocks that you need, and you will have mastered assumption. Then you'll take the same building blocks, you'll apply them to evaluate. Again, you can see very, very comprehensive stuff. That's about 3 hours of evaluate, at least right out here. Then you'll go through strengthen, then you'll go through weaken. And this is kind of where you're reinforcing this and logically completes paradox and boldface and everything. Once you do this, what you're gonna really see is cementing quizzes. And cementing quizzes are really, really important at this point. Now, as you go through cementing quizzes, some of you will go through them right away and will hit the threshold on cementing quizzes right away. Um, Others will not. The key over here is to learn from every cementing quiz, is to do that strategic review, to build that error log, which is there in the last module in CR course. As you do that, you're going to see that yourself crossing that threshold and maintaining that threshold. Okay. And which is where your weighted accuracy, you can see, will go all the way up, and that time to answer question. These are Scholinium plots. Each one of you will have a plot like this if you focus on learning the question. Okay. Your goal over here is to, and all of these thresholds are built in there. You can really see last 20, hard accuracy, 55% threshold. That's already built there. If you cross 55% threshold in SCCR and RC, you are at that V36 level. The further you go beyond that 55% hard threshold, then you go towards V40, V44, V45, or so on and so forth. Okay. And here's an example of a guy who improved by about 270 points. He basically said, hey, someone who thought I was good at logic, but because I didn't slow down, because I didn't do pre-thinking, I was making mistakes. The moment I started doing this, I was able to improve. This guy is one who's studying in Tak. We get about, I think last year half the class at Tak were EG, half the Indian class at Tak were EG matters overall. Okay. Again, experience this part of this learning. Go through the free trial and see what it does for you. Okay. With that, if you have questions, put those questions in the Q&A pod. I'll be happy to answer those questions. I already see about 5 to 6 questions here. But other than that, I'd appreciate feedback on the webinar on the right-hand side. Let me share the session handout. Over here, you guys can download this. And let me share some web links as well. Again, if you've not connected with me on LinkedIn, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can take a Sigma X mock if you need help with your study plan. And here's where you build your personalized study plan as well. And again, if you've not connected with us on YouTube, do connect with us as well. Okay, let's look at the questions here. Let me just go increase the. Okay, so Srinivas says, I have a doubt. How long should one take to complete a module given in the dashboard? I see it takes longer to complete it actually. Srinivas, all the times that we have stated over there are median times, which means when we look at any learning activity, we look at the time required to finish that. We look at about 1,000 attempts, serious attempts, and then look at this. There's also the 50th, 25th percentile and the 75th percentile time, and that can go up by one standard deviation, and which is about 50% of median time. So if the median time to finish an activity is about 30 minutes, you know and some people may finish it in about 15 minutes. Why? Because if you feel you're really good with it, some people do the pre-assessment and then go to the post-assessment directly. Others may take 45, 50 minutes, and that's okay as long as you're understanding it. Remember, stage one of learning is about building ability. It's not about timing. So that's okay as long as you're focusing on understanding things. Okay. Sid, thank you for this. We truly appreciate that feedback. Vinay says, I did SC completely, did almost done with CR. I've done cementing and SC, got 70% on hard. That's excellent. That's 90th percentile ability. However, when I do mocks, I find my SC pattern recognition skills go down while attempting the an SC question after doing multiple CRs and RC. That's a great point. So, Vinay, um, first of all, thank you for asking this question. What Vinay is essentially saying is he did SC, he did SC cementing, he passed SC cementing. So, if you pass SC cementing, those skills are there. Then he did CR and RC, and he's probably done with those as well, done well in cementing. But then as he's taking mock, some of those SC skills have gone down, and he's saying, because I'm no longer looking for those SC patterns over there. So what you need is what we call as test readiness, right to the team. Send them the exact same piece. They'll create a test readiness regimen for you, which is where our LMP comes in, where you have to start with some of the revision, not from the course, but just from Scholarinium. They'll help you build those quizzes. They'll give you a template of that, and then you can go from there. But yes, this is something which is a which some people face, and we have excellent solutions to this. Just write to the team, and then they'll build a custom plan for you. Okay. Um, Okay, Shubhang says, usually instructors are in a hurry to wind up the sessions. Again, I don't get to interact with you guys as much as I used to. There was a time about 6 years back, I would take about 4 to 5 sessions a week, and I really loved doing that. And I hope to do this once Pyle and I move back to India, where our life becomes a little less crazy. So I appreciate you guys spending the time with us, and even though it's gone beyond those 2 hours overall. How do you write to the team? You can write to me directly at rajat@e-gmat.com or support at e-gmat. I mean, for those of you who've just purchased, make sure, please go through your onboarding. You have the support IDs. Please go through the onboarding sessions. Talk to the folks who are supporting you. Okay, really important. If you can't find help, write to us, please. Okay. Will there be an inference session? No, unfortunately not. But again, if you need one, write to the team. We can help you. Okay. So we've done some sessions in the past. We'll be happy to share those recordings with you. Do we help with MBA admission processes? Unfortunately, not. As I said, with the question early on with tutoring, we do tutoring with on a very, very selective basis, which is why you don't see it on our website. Same thing. There's a lot that we know about MBA admissions. I've helped a lot of people with admissions in the past, but never offered this as a service just because of the volume of students that we deal with. It's not possible for us to uh, 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 provide this. Okay. So. So that's something I want to make sure that that we do. So unfortunately, we can't help you with MBA admissions, but I can suggest some good consultants who are there. Also, we have an excellent blog. So one of the things that we do is we do work with consultants, and we really say, hey, if you want to show how good you are, why don't you write on our blog? So if you go to e-GMAT blogs, and you see, lots of people who've gotten into B schools, you'll see their MBA journeys. We also interview people where we talk about, hey, how did you get into Wharton, Harvard, Stanford, Dark, Ross, and Darden, and so on and so forth. Which consultant did you use? How did you apply for scholarships? How did you negotiate scholarships? All of those use cases are on the blog. We have upwards of, I think, if you total it up, it's upwards of $10 million worth of scholarships that exist, and that pretty much cover all the strategies that are there on the blog. That you're there. Okay. All right, guys. With that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and hopefully, I get to see more of you, more through me conducting more sessions, and more through you guys joining us in more sessions. Tomorrow we have the algebra session. It's going to be Shweta who's conducting that. If you want to know who she is, go to our YouTube channel. She just uploaded a video on our YouTube channel, and then next week it'll be me again for our RC session. Thank you very much, and have an excellent day.